All right, so we're going to get going with our September member presentation at Cascadia Composers. And thank you all for joining tonight. And for tonight, we have Arthur Breur, who is going to be our presenter. And he is a composer in residence for the Tualatin Valley Community Band and the Tualatin Valley Symphony. And he's going to talk about his experience promoting himself as a professional composer, and particularly through collaborations that he has built. So without further ado, welcome Arthur and take it away.
Thank you very much. Um, very pleased to be here, and I'm excited to talk about this. This is a topic to me that I've brought up a number of times, various different elements in the idea of working with community, and this organization is a community organization. Essentially, it's a community of composers, and I have been working with my local community here in Portland, in the Portland area, to grow my own composing practice, as it were. But it came about in kind of a long path. It came about in a way that I was previously, I lived in Tampa about 11, 12 years ago. And when I was living there, I'd started a company doing web development. Right after I got out of college, I couldn't get a job right out of college doing music. Didn't realize that was going to happen, but I had graphic design skills. So I went into graphic design. Eventually, I ended up going into web development, and I started a web development company in 2001. And one of the things that I did almost immediately with that business was join a local community organization, the Chamber of Commerce, locally in my city. And that brought me lots of business for my web development business. And that was great. And I did that when I was in Tampa. I also did that when I moved here. I joined the Tualatin Valley, the Tualatin Chamber of Commerce. I also joined PABA, which was the Portland Area Business Association. Now it's called Oregon Pride in Business. So I joined both a local community geographic business organization for my web development business, but I also joined a community because it was the LGBT community for PABA. And I promoted my business through those things. But I had started realizing that I wasn't promoting myself as a composer. And I have always considered myself to be a composer first and foremost. I was a composer who had a web development business, but I was only promoting the web development business. I wasn't promoting the fact that I was a professional composer. People paid me to write music. And so around 2013, I decided I needed to go ahead and put my money where my mouth was in terms of my music. And so I switched over to not just presenting myself as a web developer at the Chamber of Commerce, but also being a composer. And I started doing that. So this is an aspect of community. A lot of people in the music world, the music business, don't necessarily think of outside organizations and outside communities other than the music community or the presentations, the performance communities, or the venue, that sort of stuff. There are a lot of people who just never think of the idea of themselves as being a business and having a presence in the business community. So that's kind of where this whole story starts. The whole story starts with the fact that I decided I was going to not just promote this other non-music business that I had as a business, but I was going to promote myself as a composer. So I'm going to do the share screen thing here. And I've got my slides that I will basically be pointing to as I go. So the topic tonight is, I'm going to call it the community connection. And this is resources in your own backyard. I know we're probably all very good at seeing a lot of the resources that we have in our own backyard. We're already involved in community in a lot of ways. But we do have, as musicians, as composers especially, we sometimes have these blinders. And I know a lot of composers I've talked to they get in this mindset. Composing can be a very solitary task. So you think of yourself as the artist working in your studio or working at your piano or working at your computer, but you don't necessarily try and connect with community. So what I'm talking about today is kind of a different direction of connecting with community that sometimes people who are composers and performers and so forth don't think about. And that is specifically promoting yourself as a business in the business community. And then in my own story, how that kind of led to the fact that now I'm a composer in residence for 2 different ensembles, which kind of came out of the blue. I got my orchestral premiere, I got a concert band premiere, I got a number of commissions kind of directly from this angle of reaching for community. And I also was able to finance things in certain cases by also connecting with the community that way. So there it goes. So the local resources to consider that I'm going to be talking about tonight are things like Chamber of Commerce or networking groups, then leveraging those local businesses that you connect with in those chambers of commerce or in those networking groups, leveraging that to be able to do financing, to be able to get contributions of services and so forth for your works, venues, all sorts of different things that you can do by connecting to those local businesses. And then as the result of all of this, becoming a composer in residence, and the way that I created a composer in residence model that I proposed to now 2 different ensembles, and I know of 2 people, one of whom is on the meeting tonight on this presentation, who also now has a composer in residence using this model, because it's something that you can basically create with an ensemble to do what you want to do with the ensemble and to do what the ensemble wants and needs. And it's what you want to do and what they want to do. Everybody wins, and there's not really any additional cost to anybody except what you would already be doing. So that's going to be kind of the overall arc of tonight's presentation. It's sort of a story going back all the way to this decision of mine to start promoting myself in a local chamber of commerce. So when I'm talking about connecting in a business group and thinking of yourself as being a business, a lot of people who are musicians and composers, when I say join a business organization, they don't understand why they should do that. They don't see a connection. Or I've had some situations where people say, well, those business organizations are all very conservative and I don't feel like I would fit in with the kind of crowd that's at a business, business meeting or networking meeting for businesses. But in my experience, it has been very, very beneficial for me to promote myself in that kind of an organization. And they have other benefits as well. So some examples of this kind of group, there are networking and referral groups.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I'm in another group right now.
Got somebody. There we go. So there are networking groups that are specifically referral groups, and these can be very beneficial. They have their pros and their cons. The good side of these kinds of networking groups is they will help you with the activity of promoting yourself as a business. The bad thing about them is sometimes they can start becoming very time consuming, and they can start becoming all about that organization and not as much about the members and the businesses. It can start becoming, in some cases, almost cult-like, where you're just worshiping that organization and you start losing attention to yourself and promoting yourself and promoting the members of the groups. But in the meantime, there are the really good things that you get from that kind of group. Another kind of group is chambers of commerce, which are very different from each other. They usually will have some kind of networking meetings. They'll have some kind of group meetings or luncheons or breakfasts. The best of them can be really fantastic. And the worst of them at worst tend to just be boring and not terribly active. So it's good to go to them and find out what their meetings are like and what their members are like to decide if it's a good fit for you. And there can be again, local organizations like the Tualatin Chamber of Commerce that I joined when I lived right by Tualatin, or community organizations that can be based on ethnicity, or they can be based on any kind of a subcommunity you belong to. They can also be based on interests. I don't specifically know of any local music networking groups like that, but I'm sure that that's the kind of thing that could happen. And again, the benefits of these things, you're thinking of yourself as a business, because whether you think you are or not, you are a professional in this industry. You are trying to get people to pay for either a presentation or to see you, or you're trying to make a living with this. There's something about what you're doing. You're trying to promote yourself. You're trying to get people to listen to your work. So you are a business, and going to these events makes you think of yourself as a business, makes you practice that mindset that you are a business. It also makes you think of the wider connections that you can make. You don't just make connections as with other performers, or with other composers, or with people who are in the recording and so forth. You make this wider net, and you cast a wider net, and you can connect with people who are peripheral industries, and you can get referrals, and you can get connections that you would never necessarily expect to get, sometimes just out of the blue, from people who have this much broader community that you're connecting yourself to. It also helps you with the practice of self-promotion. So a lot of people, especially I find this with people who are younger, who are still students and so forth, they don't necessarily learn how to say, I'm a composer. I specialize in writing music for live performance. I create emotional melodic music that is personalized to somebody's needs for an event or a presentation. So being able to just say something like that, to define yourself quickly so that people understand what it is that you do, and to be able to stand up in front of a group of people and say that, and to say it concisely, and to say it in a way that people remember. That's the kind of skill that you get going to networking meetings and going to chambers of commerce, whether or not it's a situation where you announce yourself in front of a group, as most chambers do in fact have, or networking groups have a time where they go around everybody who's there, and everybody introduces themselves. They say who they are, and if they've got a business name, and what it is that they do. Or even a tagline, coming up with a tagline for yourself. The tagline that I came up with, actually a friend of mine came up with recently is, I create music drawn from your heart. So you can say that really quickly, and somebody can remember that idea as a tagline or a slogan for yourself. So you add those tools to your self-promotion by going to these kinds of groups. Elevator speech, again, is what I'm just talking about. The way of quickly telling somebody what it is you do. You get on an elevator, somebody asks you what you do, you can tell them what it is before they have to get off the elevator. Public speaking, creating business cards. A lot of times composers don't necessarily think that they would need to have a business card, or for example, a website, or various different tools for promoting themselves. And belonging to these kinds of groups is usually encouragement to have something like that, because you want to hand your business card to people. And that's a useful tool, whether or not you're at a chamber event, a networking group, or you just run into somebody on the street and they find out you're a composer, and now you've got a card you can hand them. So that's the benefit of thinking of yourself as a business, having that practice of presenting yourself as a business, and having materials are some of the things that this very often will prompt you to have those tools in your arsenal. And again, it breaks you out of the box of thinking of yourself as only in the music industry, or only with these people that you connect with, or only having these particular avenues of communication. It opens up your network to a whole different level of professional communication and communicating with professionals. So what happened with me in this case is I started promoting myself. Instead of just promoting myself as a web developer, I started promoting myself as a composer. And at first it felt a little bit it felt a little bit vulnerable for me to no longer just be saying it's easy for me to promote this business that I have, but to actually go out and say I am a composer and I create music, and then have that out there with all of these people who knew me as a technical web developer person. It was, a little bit revealing and vulnerable, but I did go through the exercise. I felt myself learning how to practice promoting that side of myself as well. I got immediate commissions. I promoted that I could create a piece of music that could be a gift for somebody, and somebody immediately hired me to create a song as a gift. Somebody who was an accountant, who I had only met through that organization. So that was immediate, that I got a direct referral. I got a direct commission from the membership there. But kind of more importantly, I now had a wide group of people in the Tualatin Chamber of Commerce who knew that I was a composer. And that was in their mind at all times when they were going out and they were networking with people. When they would go out and meet somebody that was involved in music or involved in weddings or involved in events, I was thinking in terms of the broader connections, and then those people were thinking in terms of all the different people that they know from the chamber and how can they connect people. So at a particular event, somebody met somebody on the other side of the room and said, oh, I've got to take you and you have to meet Arthur. And it turned out this person was a cellist. She was the treasurer for the Tualatin Valley Symphony. And I wouldn't have gotten that introduction. She wouldn't have been dragged from one side of this event to the other side of the event to meet me if somebody hadn't known, oh, you're a musician. I know somebody here who's a composer. And so I met Celia Volk, who is the cellist with the Tualatin Valley Symphony. And kind of the funny running gag with that was, she said, I'm a cellist with the symphony. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I almost never make it downtown, but I'll have to do that. And she said, no, not downtown. I'm a member of the symphony here. I said, what do you mean here? She said, here in Tualatin, we play in Tualatin. I said, Tualatin has a symphony? So it completely had blown past me that right in my own community, there was a community orchestra that was performing 4 times a year. And I knew nothing about it, partly because they're a small and growing orchestra, but that particular oversight on my part kind of just blew my mind that I didn't know that. The orchestra ended up joining the Chamber of Commerce as well, and had the tagline, did you know Tualatin has a symphony orchestra? Because that was the running joke. Did who here knows that Tualatin has a symphony orchestra? So I got that introduction to Celia, and Celia said, here, let me give you a ticket to the first concert of this season. So this is in 2016, fall of 2016. She hands me a ticket to the concert and says, please come to the concert, and I'd be happy to introduce you to the conductor. And so I absolutely was not going to miss that concert. She had ahead of time mentioned me to the conductor that I was a composer and that I was going to be coming to the concert. So after the concert, which was all music by Dead White Guys, I went up to the conductor and I introduced myself. And I said, I was really impressed with this concert. It was fantastic. It had Bach, it had Schubert. It was a generally diverse musical concert, but again, it was all standard classical music. So I asked the conductor, I said, this was a fantastic concert. Do you do music by living composers or local composers, or both? And he said, yes, in fact, the next concert, we have a cellist who's also a composer who will be coming in and he'll be playing a cello concerto by another composer, and we'll be playing 3 works of his. But, in the final concert of the year, we have some space in the program. So if you wrote something, we would play it. And my heart stopped for a minute. And I said, well, absolutely, that would be fantastic. And he said, you could write the Tualatin Valley Overture. And I thought, I kind of said right there, well, Tualatin Valley is a little bit bigger than I'm familiar with as an overall topic, but I'm a member of the Tualatin Chamber of Commerce, and I know a lot about the city of Tualatin. So how about we just make it the Tualatin Overture? Kind of controls the breadth of what the piece is going to be. A little more concise on the title, but what do you think of that? He said, yeah, that would be great. By the time I got back to my house, I'd already come up with some themes and was already working on creating the music. I was so excited that I had a conductor of a symphony orchestra saying, if you wrote a piece of music, we would play it. And that happened because of an introduction that happened at the Chamber of Commerce at a basically like a little trade show event that they had. And then the person that I was introduced to there, introducing me to the conductor of the orchestra. So it wasn't me going out with a cold call, wasn't me sending out emails or making phone calls to folks and saying, hey, I'm a composer, would you want to play my music? It was a warm introduction. It was somebody who had been given a heads up ahead of time. Because when I got to the concert afterwards, when I met Dr. Perlman, who's the conductor, he said, oh, yeah, Celia told me about you. You're the guy who wrote the George Takei Rag. Yes, I am. There was already awareness of me. He'd already heard my music, and so there was a warm introduction, and that made a huge difference, as well as the fact that I was meeting him in person. So that led to the Tualatin Overture, which premiered in May of 2017. And that was my orchestral premiere. And that would not have happened if that warm introduction through the Chamber of Commerce, kind of a random meet this person, it hadn't happened. And now I'm realizing those kinds of ensembles are all over the place. We have community orchestras, we have community bands, we have local string quartets, we have local people who have who have small ensembles, who have saxophone ensembles and barbershop quartets and all sorts of things like that in our community that are another rich resource that's there available local to us. So from that overture, I got another introduction. Well, that made for a warm introduction. I went to a concert by the Tualatin Valley Community Band, which is not associated with the Tualatin Valley Symphony. They just happen to be in the same geographic area with the same similar names. But I went to one of their concerts, again, really loved it, was impressed. During intermission, I walked up to the stage and I was gonna try and introduce myself to the conductor, but somebody else was up there and saw me, and I said, hi, I'm Arthur Breur, I'm a composer. And he said, yeah, you composed the Tualatin Overture, and that was really amazing. And so we talked a little bit about me composing, and he said, the Twilight Valley Community Band is having its 30th year next year, and we are thinking about hiring somebody to write an overture or a piece of music for the 30th anniversary celebration of the Twilight Valley Community Band. So that introduction, me being able to also go up and have that happen, led to what's called the Tuesday Night Overture, which is an overture I wrote for the Twilight Valley Community Band as a commission. So this introduction that led to me composing a piece of music, the Twilight Overture, led to another introduction, which led to an actual commission for a full concert piece. And again, I credit all of these back to my promoting myself as a business through the Chamber of Commerce. That was the catalyst for all of these things happening. And
Arthur, could I ask a question?
Of course.
When you meet people and you tell them you're a composer and you talk, you chat, you get friendly with them, don't they ask you, I'd like to hear what your music is like? Do you have a demo of some sort? What do you do when somebody asks you, well, you're a composer, what does your music sound like?
What I do at that point is I almost always immediately say, you can go to my website and you can hear music off of my website.
Okay.
And it's easy to know what my website is because, one, I'm a web developer and I planned this out. If I happen to be in Tualatin, I can just say, go to tualatincomposer.com. And that will redirect them to my website, arthurbreur.com. I also can say, go to portlandcomposer.com and it'll take you to my website, or go to vancouvercomposer.com and it'll take you to, if I happen to be in one of those areas, But portlandcomposer.com is pretty easy. arthurbreuer.com, I own all the spellings, so that helps, and they all redirect to the right place. But Arthur Breuer is a little tricky to spell. But having things online is the easiest way to have people be able to hear the music, because they can see it at any time. And I have a YouTube channel, so I can say go to YouTube, but it's easier to have them get to YouTube from my website first. And
Okay.
having an easy, concise domain name makes it easier for me to then go ahead and direct them to someplace where they're going to remember it. And it's also on my business card, so that
Sounds
they
like
can
a
see it on
plan.
my business card.
Yeah.
So, yep. And that I highly recommend. It's, for posting videos to YouTube, it's free to do. SoundCloud, same thing. And you can then link to those things off of your website. So very simple and straightforward now, because the internet is out there for everybody.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, absolutely. So go back to sharing. So this is how, kind of almost inadvertently, from promoting myself as a business in a non-music organization, I ended up becoming, having an orchestral premiere, a concert band. It wasn't my concert band premiere, but a concert band commission. And it also eventually led to my being the composer in residence for these two ensembles, which I'll basically get into shortly. Let's get through that screen. So part of the process also, what happened when I was creating the Tualatin Overture. The conductor said, if you wrote something, we would play it. He didn't say, we would like to commission you for a work. What he said was, if you write something for that concert, you will play it. And to me, that was, if you spend the effort and invest your time and your skill into creating a piece of music, we will give you the value of having a premiere concert for your work, which to me was excellent compensation for my first orchestral work and for orchestral premiere. But at the same time, while I was working on that orchestral piece, which turned out to be 12 minutes long, and I was originally planning it would be maybe 7 or 8 minutes at the most, but it ended up being a bigger work than I expected it to be. And it ended up turning into more time on my part than I wanted, or that I had planned. And so I thought I need to start figuring out how I can get some compensation for this time that I'm doing, because I'm spending a lot of time and I'm not focusing on other things that I need to be doing to be bringing some income in at the same time. So I decided to use that same Chamber of Commerce membership to go in and promote myself. And the fact that I was writing this piece of music about the city of Tualatin to these Tualatin businesses. I was able to say, I'm creating a piece of music that is personalized to this city and to the area and to the businesses here and all that sort of stuff. Would you be willing to be a sponsor for this piece of music? And in some cases, I said, if you sponsor at a certain amount, I'm going to be having notes in the program. I will put your information into the notes in the program, as well as putting your name on the score as somebody who sponsored this piece of music. And I did, in fact, in situations where somebody was a higher level sponsor, or if they were historically important, because there were people who have names that are names of streets in Tualatin, who were people who were sponsors for this piece of music. I actually wrote their names into the music, using the trick of using A, B, C, D, E, F, G as the notes, but then going up the rest of the scale to get the whole alphabet and being able to make letters into the notes of a melody. And so I actually composed people into the music at a certain level of sponsorship. I wanted to have it videotaped, and I wanted to have additional, printing and things like that. So I asked some professionals, would you be willing to, for example, would you be willing to videotape? Would you be willing to be a photographer? So I can have some documentation of this, and so I can have a YouTube video and so forth. And if you do that, how much would it cost? And then you'll get the in-kind contribution of whatever advertising level would be the same. And so I had services that were provided as part of it that I didn't have to pay cash for at the time, to be able to get those services while I was, working on this piece of music. So I was able to get myself some income by myself without it coming from the ensemble. And this was fairly straightforward and easy for me to do at the Chamber of Commerce. I could go to the Chamber of Commerce and say, I'm looking for people who would like to advertise to several hundred people who are going to be at a concert, and they'll all have a program and they'll take the programs home with them. And they're all local people because it's a local community orchestra. So this local Chamber of Commerce, the members of this organization can benefit from this advertising. So that was a good fit with that. And of course, I did just ask for people, if you would just be willing to be a patron of the art, if you would just be willing to give money to contribute to this creation of something I'm hoping is going to be a valuable piece of art for the community. And that brings me to the idea, when you're doing this kind of thing, especially when you're in a situation where, like a Chamber of Commerce, never assume that your idea of a large amount of money or a small amount of money is the same as anybody else's idea of what a large amount of money or a small amount of money is. Because I went into one of these chamber meetings, and I said, I am looking for advertisers and sponsors for this piece of music. And I'm looking to, I would like to, get to a certain dollar amount within, this next week. And somebody at the meeting came up to me and said, you probably shouldn't be asking, these people for lots of money. That's a lot of money you're asking for the total. And, a lot of these people are small businesses, and that's a lot of money to ask from them. While she was talking to me, somebody else came up to me and said, I would like to give you a $500 check right now. So I'm not going to complain about that, but I'm also never going to assume that I should be asking for a certain dollar amount from people when, okay, to me is, if I ask for $20, people might give $20. If I ask for $200, somebody might give $200. If I ask for $2,000, somebody might give $2,000. So don't set a limit and don't set your expectations on top of your money asks. Basically, when you're saying you want to get to a certain amount of money, don't necessarily say you want to get it all from one person, but don't ever under ask because you have lower expectations of what your, what a lot of money is than other people might. Be careful when you are asking for money not to ask for too little or not to limit what you're asking for. That was a big lesson to me that one day, that one person was saying, asking for $20 from these people is a lot. And then somebody walked up and was handing me a check for $500. And even those, even $500, some people think $500 is nothing. When they're looking for sponsors for the Oregon Symphony, they're looking with a lot more zeros than 2 zeros. So there's, it's all sorts of different scales that you're dealing with. And when you're dealing with a smaller community ensemble, maybe the numbers are smaller, but don't set them too low when you are asking for money from people and asking for that kind of information and so forth. Definitely don't under ask, don't sell yourself short. Like that a lot. So yep. Next screen. So all of this sort of led to me being the bait that never went away. So my work with the orchestra, when I was done with the Twilight Overture, while I had been working on the Twilight Overture, I had been going to the rehearsals and taking chunks of the music as I was composing it for them to play things. And if I had a situation where I wasn't sure if something was going to work, I would take a little preview in and say, can you just play through this? I want to make sure this sounds the way that I want it to. And the conductor was fine with that. He knew I was composing it for their ensemble, and that worked out nicely. But then while I was composing it, they asked if I would be on the board. And at the time, I felt like I didn't want to be on the board because I didn't want it to come across like I was using the board membership with some kind of compensation for me composing the piece of music. And I didn't want composing the piece of music to be, either sidelined or wrapped up with anything that was going on with the board. But I did say, as soon as the piece is done, and after that, if you would, if you ask me again, at that point, I will reconsider, I would consider being on the board. So I ended up being on the board of the orchestra after working on the piece of music. And I suggested the idea then of having a composer in residence program that somebody could be the composer in residence for the orchestra, and how we could create something like that that would be mutually beneficial. And at the time, the concertmaster was also a composer and had composed music for the orchestra as well. And I suggested that he could be the first person who would be the composer in residence for the orchestra, and he was. He became the orchestra's first composer in residence. And the idea was, let's then use the composer in residence role to create what the composer in residence role is. The responsibility of the composer in residence, their first responsibility is to decide what the composer in residence is supposed to do. And that worked out pretty well, although at the time, that person was just too busy with things and didn't get that opportunity to do that. And then he also had plans for moving away shortly thereafter. He didn't know they were going to happen. And so he left, and kind of randomly at a board meeting, a few board meetings later, one of the board members happened to say, well, Arthur's our composer in residence now, which I didn't know until that was said. So I said, oh, okay, I'll be the composer in residence. And I kind of made it an official thing. I propose that I'm the composer in residence. What would the responsibilities be? And again, the responsibilities are, I have to come up with what the responsibilities are. So I started creating something that was a mutually beneficial agreement. I wanted something that wasn't going to cost me any money, and it didn't have to cost the orchestra. At the time, the orchestra was still growing and did not have finances to pay somebody to be a resident artist. So let's create a role that doesn't need to have either party putting out any cost. I wanted it to kind of match what I already wanted to do. I wanted it to be something that was already in my skill set, as well as was beneficial to me. I didn't want it to be things that I wasn't already wanting to do and that the orchestra didn't want. And I also wanted it to be a situation where other people had music that was, I know all these other composers. I'm in this composer organization. I am on New Music Twitter. I've got friends all over the world who are also composers, that they could also send me music that I could present to the music director and say, I know this person who's a composer, and they sent this piece of music, and I think you should look at this piece of music and consider, having the orchestra play it. And also the idea that they could just play that once in a rehearsal, so we could, see how the musicians respond to perhaps a brand new score and make comments on it without necessarily agreeing that they would perform it. So that was something that I wanted to do, be able to not just do this for myself, but also to be able to promote new music in general. I have since filled out a composer agreement that is not just with the Twilight and Valley Symphony, but also with the Twilight and Valley Community Band. And the agreement that I created now has been used and slightly modified by at least 2 other people. And it's available for free. It's at composerinresidence.org. There's another domain name that I grabbed because I'm a web developer and I thought of it, so I grabbed it. But composerinresidence.org, there's an example of this agreement. It's freely available, and it just basically says, as the composer in residence for this organization, I can bring my music in to have it played, to have it just read through, can bring in music by other composers to have it read through. And in my situation, I didn't insist that there actually be a premiere piece during the year, that there be a performance of my piece. But Garrett Hope, who's another composer, he used the agreement that he inserted, that there would be at least one performance of his music during the year, which again, it's mutually agreeable. And I think it's a great clause to add in there. So he did that. And so he gets a guaranteed performance each year. I'm not worried about that because, you know, with the community band and with the orchestra both, there are opportunities for me to compose or arrange pieces. And when I go to them and say, I would like to have a piece of music for such and such a need, they're agreeable to, you know, at least to listen to it and to consider the idea of that as a performance. So any questions at this point? Not seeing any questions right now.
I was curious, what instrument do you play?
I play piano, and I grew up in church choir. I always say that the three foundations of my music are Sesame Street, church choir, and Star Wars when I saw the movie in the theater when I was 9 years old. And, you know, movie scores, Sesame Street, or the Muppets, and church music kind of create this sensibility that I compose with. And I've been playing piano, my parents say, since I could reach it. I started studying piano when I was 10 years old, and I have a Bachelor of Music in Piano Performance, and I focused on composition myself.
Did you mention that, is there really a VancouverComposers.com?
VancouverComposer.com will redirect you, I believe. I think I have it set up. Redirect you to my website.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So that's you.
So again, back to Garrett Hope. Garrett Hope is a podcaster. He has the Portfolio Composer podcast. And he talks about the idea of, as a composer, you have all of these different channels of music and all these channels of income that you can use. So don't just think of yourself as a composer and you have to have your music, a commission happen. Don't just think in terms of getting a commission. Don't just think of sheet music. Maybe think of music being licensed. Think of other ways that your music, can be creating you income. You could be giving lessons. You could be, you could also be giving presentations and things like that. So there's other avenues of income for you than just the creating the sheet music or just getting your music royalties from Spotify or whatever. So the Portfolio Composer, and I was interviewed by him on his podcast. And, it was one of those situations where, different connections happen. And while I was talking to him, he wanted me on the podcast to talk about websites, because he had noticed that composer websites are very often, a kind of a very last consideration as far as what a composer wants to do. And is my sound okay? Because I'm seeing notifications that my sound might be a little distorted.
Yeah, it's weird. It happened as soon as you were responding to my question. Suddenly, your voice got distorted from that point on.
Yeah.
Is it still distorted?
I'm sorry for asking the
Now it
question.
sounds
No,
better.
now it sounds better. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, this is
So while I was on the podcast with Garrett, he said, "How can people find you?" And I said, "You can go to, or actually one of the questions was, what about a domain name? What domain name should people get?" And I said, well, you can get your own name and composer, or your own name. You should have your own name. And I said, you could do something geographic like Portland Composer. I said, hey, I should look and see if that was taken. So right there, while I was doing the podcast with him, I typed up on GoDaddy and I went and grabbed PortlandComposer.com. So now I own PortlandComposer.com, and it makes it just really easy to point people, to my website, because they don't have to worry about how you spell Breur.
very clever.
So.
How about Portlandia Composer? Do you have that one? Well,
That
I
might
shouldn't
exist,
say
but might
anything
not-
more.
yeah,
Now
that
you'll go
might
and
be
grab that
available.
one. Yeah.
Portlandia Composer, grab it. So, so again, all of these things happened through the Chamber of Commerce. membership and promoting myself professionally, putting it out there that, that I'm a composer in an environment where a lot of people don't think of promoting themselves when they're musicians, when they're performers or composers. And it opens up a completely different horizon, completely different set of resources, and widely expands the number of people and the areas of connection you get. Also makes you think differently in terms of what's a good connection for me to have as a composer. A good connection for me to have as a composer, would be a wedding planner. If I knew somebody who created great events like that, and had a situation where they were working with somebody that wanted to have original music, even if they didn't want to have original music, if they just wanted to have, they wanted to have live performers. I know live performers and I can connect those people together. So it adds these different dimensions to how we think about the business of that, what we're doing, what we are creating, and how we can leverage what we do into different industries and the people that are in different areas. A lot of different things. So a lot of times people will be buying a house, because they've gotten married or they're getting married. Changes happen like that. So a real estate agent, you think, why would I want to be connecting with a real estate agent? Well, they're aware of people's life changes. And life changes are a situation that I can compose music for. I can compose music for a birth. I can compose music for an anniversary. I can compose music for a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, which were two of my favorite commissions. Any other questions?
Do you think your advice could apply to somebody who is writing more like, let's say, abstract music?
I think it could. I think in that situation, what you're looking for more is the idea of people coming to experience the art versus it necessarily being something, because more abstract music can be used for, definitely for videos and for presentations. It isn't something that needs to necessarily just be in a concert venue. So it can be used for other things. But to be able to then say, I'm doing a concert and come to this concert, you could do all of exactly the same things I did with the 12th Overture, as far as presenting a concert, and it's going to be new music, it's going to be potentially myself or other artists. And same thing, you could say, I'm looking for people to be sponsors for the event, to provide advertising, looking for somebody, maybe to do video for it. And if you would do video, it would be this value, and I could put you in as an advertiser. So that whole connection still would work for that as well. And I know in the Twilight Chamber, I don't know if there are right now, but there have been people who are performers. There are people who are singers and choir members and things like that. I know somebody who it wasn't the reason they were in the Chamber of Commerce, but they were also in a barbershop quartet. So the fact that they knew I was a composer, they came over and were asking me if I could compose or arrange something for barbershop quartet, because they would really like to have something. They were thinking about creating something original and something that was, again, kind of geographically or community oriented for the work that they wanted to sing and perform, something that they could do that people could take personally where they perform. So yeah, and it isn't necessarily just for the more tonal and traditional and so forth of music. That just happens to be what I create. It happens to be my sensibilities came from church music and from the Muppets and from movie scores. But I really honestly think that for any composer, for anything like that, I do know a number of composers who do house concerts, who do all sorts of different kinds of music in their house concerts, and that's another thing that you could utilize that for, creating a local community concert or a house concert, or a concert in a park, and use that extended community to promote the event. And chambers also very often have community calendars, as well as community newsletters. So you're broadening your marketing reach by including this marketing that goes out through another organization as well. Essentially, I think of this group as more of a trade organization that I belong to. So it fits in the vertical of composers. But instead of just thinking of composers this way, you think of all businesses this way, and you connect to somebody, so you get this much broader, three-dimensional map of people who you're connected to.
I will note we also produce concerts, including one later this month on the 26th.
Yes. So yeah, and that's.
Oh,
Yep,
sorry.
Liz?
I'm just curious, getting back to the bar mitzvah. I attended my first bar mitzvah, my grandson, and another one's coming up. What kind of piece did you write for the bar mitzvah?
So the bar mitzvah happened because I took on the title of composer for hire. This was kind of in reaction to, again, talking with Garrett Hope, and like, it's just Arthur Breur, composer. I'm like, let's put it out there a little bit more that I do composing professionally. You can hire me to write a piece of music. So I started promoting myself as composer for hire, and I put that on my website, and I got somebody who was trying to, searching for hire a composer. So the fact that I had composer for hire in my website got that person's, search to find me. And they said, my son is going to be turning 13. He's going to be having his bar mitzvah. And I wanted to have a piece of classical piano music for the video that's going to be all of this. It's going to be a video slideshow of the pictures of him growing up. The pictures of him from being a baby all the way up until to him now. And I wanted a piece of classical piano for that. And I said, I can absolutely do that. That sounds like a lot of fun. First of all, tell me what you mean when you say a classical piano piece. And he said, like the theme from the Peanuts. So I'm really glad I asked him what he meant, but he wanted it to sound like that. So I composed a piece of music. His son's name is Asher, and I composed a piece of music that's Asher's song that sounds very much like the Peanuts theme, but it's also its own piece of music. It's distinct. It's got humor to it. It's got a lot of motion, and that was a very fun thing. And then the same person came back a couple of years later and said, you remember me? You composed a piece of music for my son. Well, now my daughter is going to be turning 13, and I would like to have a piece of music for her bat mitzvah. And so I composed a piece of music. In that case, he wanted something that sounded more like a pop song, something that would be, Rihanna or Pink or Taylor Swift or something like that. So it was a completely different piece of music to create. But then I got a repeat commission from that person for having composed the first one for him, as well as a 5-star Google review. So, which is something else. Again, thinking of yourself as a business, put yourself out on Google. Put yourself as a business on Google. And make sure that if somebody searches for things, they can find you. Somebody searches for composer in Oregon, they can find you. And yeah, a lot of times people will go to a composer organization and look through the list of composers, but a lot of people don't know that those things exist, and they'll just go to Google and type in, local composer. Any other questions?
I want to know what you're writing now.
I'm writing a whole bunch of things right now. The pandemic really sidelined my creativity. For all of 2020, I almost wrote nothing. And then January 31st was when the bat mitzvah piece was going to be due. So on January 1st, I'm in the month. I've got to get it done this month. So I need to start composing. And I sat down and I started working with the inspirations that he had given me for that piece of music, and had the piece composed by January 4th. So that was a nice reminder that I actually could compose something. I hadn't lost the skill, I had just lost the motivation. I fairly recently also had a dream where I was watching the score play of this beautiful piece of music that was strings and alto saxophone. And I heard the last 4 notes of the music right as I woke up, and I knew the piece was called Sabine, Sabine. And I went to the piano and I tried playing the last 4 notes, and I couldn't get it to sound right no matter how I played it, until I realized that it was composed in a pentatonic mode, the pentatonic scale, and a non-Western pentatonic scale. And so now I've got that piece that I want to compose. For the Tualatin Valley Symphony, I was commissioned by Celia, the cellist that I first met at the Tualatin Chamber. I was commissioned to compose an overture that's supposed to call people back in from intermission. So she said, I want to have something that the orchestra can start playing so that people know intermission's over and people can walk back in while this piece is playing. I mean, the conductor doesn't have to conduct it, but the instruments can. Well, I said, if you're going to do that, you really need to have it be the people who have to get there first. So it's going to have to be like the brass in the back. So how about if I write a brass piece? I can do a fanfare that brings people back. So I'm working on the comeback fanfare. And just because I've got Sabine in my head and I'm trying to come up with a way of writing a piece of music in a pentatonic scale, I decided to compose that piece entirely in this pentatonic scale. And so that's, that is a piece that I'm working on. And before the pandemic, I had started working on 2 narrated pieces. And I literally was contacting sponsors and getting in-kind contributions lined up for these narrated pieces. And the pandemic just completely derailed me. And, nobody's going to want to spend money. Everybody's locked up, and so that derailed me. And now I'm getting myself back on track to start getting the sponsorships and the advertisers and the contributions for this. One very generous organization is the Oregon Arts Watch. They have been great with nonprofits and with promotion for people who are in the arts, with helping with advertising and all that sort of stuff. But the 2 pieces are How Annabelle Came to Be on That Island, which is a story about a girl who gets lost at sea, fights pirates, has these, all these adventures, and they all sound like they're tall tales, except for the fact that she explains that the reason she was able to do all these things is she's the youngest child of a family that she has 12 older brothers, and they all did these different things that she practiced how to do with them, and she practiced and practiced and practiced. So you can do it too if you practice and practice and practice. That's the How Annabelle Came to Be on That Island, which I want to create for orchestra, concert band, or piano and narrator. And then the other one is Amber the Ambitious Arachnid, which is about a spider who decides that she's trying to catch a car because she sees these huge bugs going by every day. She's got her web by the road. And so she keeps trying to build a bigger and bigger web to catch a car. That's kind of, I'm working on all sorts of things. There's not one particular primary project at this time. There's sort of this mishmash of things that I can work on. So if I feel like I'm uninspired on one thing, I can move over to another. And I have just a bunch of pieces of music that I want to arrange. So I can just fall into arranging something if I am uninspired on composing.
That's cool.
Any other questions? I think that's it then.
All right. Well, thank you so much for presenting. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I think we will call it a night here.
Great to see you.